Right now, somewhere in the world, a couple is trying to have a kid. They know exactly what causes it. They know the timing, the biology, the whole process, down to the cellular level. But here's a wild question. Humans didn't always know that. For most of human history, the link between sex and babies wasn't obvious at all. It's not written down anywhere. It's not carved into cave walls with a diagram. Somebody, somewhere, had to figure it out. Without a textbook, without a doctor, without anyone to explain it to them. It's older than agriculture, older than pottery, older than most things we consider basic human knowledge. And the strange part, for huge stretches of history, plenty of human societies didn't fully connect the dots. So the question is, when did humans actually figure out where babies come from? And why did it take so long? Let's start at the beginning. And the beginning is genuinely confusing. Here's the problem early humans were up against. Pregnancy doesn't show up right away. A woman might have sex, and then nothing visibly changes for weeks, sometimes months. If you're a hunter-gatherer with no calendar, no writing, and no concept of a 9-month countdown, that gap is a huge problem. Cause and effect are supposed to be close together. Touch fire, get burned, instant, eat bad meat, get sick pretty quick, but sex and birth, that's separated by the better part of a year. Anthropologists have a name for this. It's a delayed causation problem, and it's genuinely one of the hardest connections for a pre-scientific mind to make. Think about that. An entire biological process, invisible until it's undeniable. So what did early humans think was happening instead? This is where it gets interesting. Ethnographers, researchers who study living traditional societies, have documented groups where the connection between sex and pregnancy was either not made explicitly or was folded into a much bigger spiritual framework. The most famous case is the Trobriand islanders of Papua New Guinea, studied by anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski in the early 1900s. Many Trobrianders described pregnancy as caused by ancestral spirits entering a woman's body, not directly by sex itself. Sex was seen as something that opened the way, but the spirit was the real cause. Now, was this because they genuinely had zero idea sex was connected? Anthropologists have debated that one for a century, and it's messier than it sounds. But the case tells us something important. Even into the 20th century, human cultures were still working out different explanations for where babies actually come from. Here's what makes this so important. This isn't a fringe detail. This is about how humans build causal reasoning itself, how a species figures out that A leads to B when B shows up 7 months later and looks like nothing that came before it. So let's go further back. Way further. By the time you get to early Homo sapiens, tens of thousands of years ago, there's no writing, so we can't ask them directly. But we can look at what they left behind, and what they left behind is bodies, specifically carved ones. Archaeologists have found what are called Venus figurines, small carved statues of women with exaggerated hips, bellies, and breasts, dating back over 30,000 years, found across Europe from France to Russia. The most famous is the Venus of Willendorf, discovered in Austria in 1908, dated to roughly 25,000 years ago. Nobody knows for certain what these figurines meant, but one leading theory is that they're tied to fertility, carved not as portraits, but as symbols of the mystery of where new humans come from. That's a species obsessing over reproduction 25,000 years before anyone wrote a word. So somewhere between sex causes pregnancy being a total mystery and modern biology textbooks, something had to shift. And that shift seems to trace back to something extremely practical: watching animals. Here's the pivot. Hunter-gatherers weren't just hunting animals. They were watching them closely for tens of thousands of years, and animals don't have a 7-month gap to obscure the connection. Many animals mate and give birth within weeks. If you're watching goats or dogs or deer, the link between mating and babies is a lot easier to spot. Then comes the real game changer, the domestication of animals, starting around 10,000 BCE. Once humans were breeding livestock on purpose, choosing which male and female animals mated to produce specific traits, the link between sex and offspring wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a tool. Farmers were actively controlling it. Think about that for a second. Selective animal breeding may have taught humans the biological mechanics of reproduction before they fully applied that same logic to themselves. But here's the thing. Knowing it works for goats doesn't automatically mean ancient people assumed it worked the same way for humans. Spiritual and social beliefs about human reproduction stuck around far longer, layered on top of the biology, in cultures all over the world for thousands more years. By the time you reach ancient Greece, around 400 BCE, physicians like Hippocrates were writing detailed, if wildly inaccurate, theories about conception, involving seeds from both parents mixing together. Aristotle disagreed and proposed his own version a century later. They were wrong about the mechanics. But notice what changed. They were now treating it as a biological question to be debated, not a spiritual mystery to be accepted. That's the real turning point. Not the moment someone discovered the link, but the moment human cultures started treating reproduction as something explainable, testable, arguable. From there, it's a slow 2,000-year crawl. Microscopes in the 1600s let scientists actually see sperm cells for the first time. The human egg wasn't even identified until 1827 by Carl Ernst von Baer. Full understanding of fertilization, the actual union of egg and sperm, wasn't confirmed until the late 1800s. Let that sink in. Humans were having children for hundreds of thousands of years before we could scientifically prove under a microscope exactly what was happening. So here's the full picture. Deep in prehistory, sex and pregnancy were separated by a gap the human brain struggled to bridge. Early societies filled that gap with spirits, ancestors, and mystery. Somewhere along the way, watching and breeding animals handed humans a biological shortcut, one they only slowly applied to themselves. The Greeks turned it into a debate. Microscopes turned it into a science, and it took until the 1800s, practically yesterday in human terms, to fully confirm what most of us now learn as a basic fact before we're even teenagers. So next time someone learns the birds and the bees in about 5 minutes, remember? It took our species roughly 300,000 years to get there, and that's kind of the story of being human. We don't start out knowing anything. We just keep watching, guessing, arguing, and slowly closing the gap between what happens and why. If you like digging into this one, there's a lot more strange ancient origin stories where this came from. Stick around for the next one.